Good evening, everyone. Hope you all had a good day, and thankful that you have made it back to be with us tonight so that we can worship together. If you're worried about the rain, Betty said, don't worry, just drop an umbrella in tonight. She said, I'll guarantee it won't rain. So we should be good to get through the rest of the evening. After that, though, it's fair game. We'll see what happens. We're going to conclude tonight a study that we've been engaged in over the last couple of weeks that deals with prayer. And if you've been here the last two Sunday nights, you know that we've approached this from the idea of before His throne. The middle image of you and me as priests under New Covenant, being able to approach the throne, the Holy of Holies, the very presence of God Himself. Of course, we know that we have Jesus as our high priest, the one that intercedes on our behalf. We've looked at the idea that when we go before the throne of God, that great things can happen. Then last week we looked at the idea of Lord, teach us to pray. As we wrap up this kind of short study together, tonight I want us to think about what about those times when we might struggle in prayer. And maybe I'm just sharing a little bit about myself, and maybe this doesn't apply to you, but I'm going to imagine that at least some, if not the majority of you, might be able to relate to this a little bit. There are times in my prayer life where I struggle. I think we even talked about this a little bit at the very beginning of this study. That prayer is one of those things that the more we engage in it, the more spiritually mature we become, and the more that we grow, the more we might benefit from it. But there are times where it feels a little bit at least like a roller coaster ride sometimes for me, if I'm just being completely open with you. And there are times in my life as I look back, now the older I get, the more I grow spiritually, these times become less frequent. But there are times in my life when I look back that I struggle with things of the nature of even, God, are you there? I'm praying, I'm pouring out my heart. Are you listening? Can you hear me? Do you care? Are you going to do anything about this particular situation that I'm bringing before your throne? Over and over again, I'm coming, and yet there's times that I've wondered these things because maybe the answer's not there, or I don't see God's answer in the moment. But you know what's interesting is you and I look through Scripture, if you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Open your Bibles with me to Job chapter 23. By way of introduction, I just want us to look at three examples from Scripture that might help set the stage for us tonight as we think about this concept of times that we might struggle with prayer. And then we'll use these examples to springboard into a discussion around what can we do? What are some things that you and I can consider that might help us in those moments when we might struggle with our prayer life? Job chapter 23. Of course, you remember the backdrop for the book of Job. Everything that he has been taken from him. Job was described as an upright man, one that feared God and kept His commandments. Listen to what Job says in Job chapter 23. Then Job answered and said, even today my complaint is bitter. My hand is listless because of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find Him, referencing God, that I might come to His seat. I would present my case before Him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which He would answer me and understand what He would say to me. Would He contend with me in His great power? No, but He would take note of me. There the upright could reason with Him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. In essence, what Job is saying is, I want my time before God. You let me stand before God and plead my case. And there are several times throughout the book of Job that he asks for this very thing. Now, it's interesting when we get to the end of the book, Job gets what he asked for. And it's totally different than what he expected. But listen to what Job says next in verse 8. Look, I go forward, but He's not there. And backward, but I cannot perceive Him. When He works on the left hand, I cannot behold Him. When He turns to the right hand, I cannot see Him. In essence, what Job is saying is, God, where are You? I want to plead my case before You, but yet, where are You? Now, Job would go on. It doesn't end there. Job, you see why he was a just man and why he was described as one who feared God and kept His commandments. Look what he says in verse 10. But He knows the way that I take. When He has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot is held fast to His steps. I've kept His ways and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of His lips. I have treasured the words of His mouth more than my necessary food. So even though Job questioned where God was, he had this desire to be able to go to Him face to face to plead his case, he still recognized God. And he still recognized the fact that he had a responsibility to God. But yet, Job still struggled. He still had some difficulty with his prayer life. Let's look at the Psalms, the 13th Psalm. We'll look specifically at verses 1 through 3. Now this is a Psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord, my God, and lighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Let's read on verse 4. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. David, in essence, is coming before God, and he said, God, do you care? Do you care about what's going on in my life? My enemies, they're pressing down round about me. They're all around me, encompassing me. God, I'm coming before you, perhaps over and over. And he's in essence just saying, God, do you care what's happening in my life? Let's go to the prophet Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 1. I'll give you a second. I had to look for it too. Habakkuk chapter 1. See, I cheated. I marked it with my ribbon here. So we'll look at verses 2 and 3. Actually, let's just go back to verse 1 because it really sets up the stage for verses 2 and 3. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. You see, the prophet Habakkuk, he's in this situation and he's crying out to God and he's basically saying, are you going to do anything, God? I keep crying out to you. I keep coming before you. Do you hear me? Are you going to do anything about my situation? So you see, if you've ever found yourself there where you wonder if God hears, if you wonder if God cares, if you wonder, is God going to do anything about my situation? You're not alone. Other men, women in Scripture, 3 men that we have just taken a quick look at, have been in that same situation. So then what do? What can you and I do? What are some things that we might be able to keep in our minds that might help us when we encounter those situations? I want us to consider 2 together this evening. The first one is this. We might have a need for self-examination. We might have a need for self-examination. Let's go to James chapter 5. If you haven't figured out, keep your Bibles handy tonight because we're going to be looking at several passages together. James chapter 5. We're going to focus specifically on verse 16 because here James gives what I'm going to call the right kinds, quote unquote, right kinds. Let's look at this verse together, specifically the last half of the verse. He says this, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. So the first thing that James describes is the right kind of prayer. So what kind of prayer then is the right kind of prayer? Well, the first thing that James says is it has to be effective. That word effective, it means to put into action, to be active in our prayer life. So it has to be effective. It's something that you and I have to engage in. We have to be active in. But it's not just effective, it has to be fervent. Some translations might actually just substitute the phrase here, supplications. Remember what that word has reference to? We actually talked about that last week. It has reference to the idea of an urgent need, this sense of urgency, begging an urgent request. So now the right kind of prayer then is something that's done, that's active, that you and I do on a regular basis. Remember what we said prayer was? It was active communication with God, regular communication. So you and I put the tool of prayer into action, and we have a sense of urgency of our prayer life. That, at least in part, is what James is talking about here when he talks about the right kind of prayer. It needs to be consistent, ongoing, active, and it needs to have a sense of urgency to it. But then he goes on to describe the right kind of man. What kind of man is that? Man in a general sense, mankind, man or woman. Righteous. That describes a person that subscribes to live by God's standards. There are certainly many different individuals of Scripture that you and I can point to that we can say were righteous. The one that comes to my mind that I want us to think about is Noah. God actually described Noah as a righteous man in Genesis chapter 6. Some versions use the word just, others say righteous. So think about that in terms of Noah, living up to God's standards. God described the society that Noah lived in as wicked to the point that every thought of their imagination was evil. Every single thought that they could come up with was evil in nature. The only person that was willing to stand up and do what was right was Noah and his family. Think about that for just a minute. You know, we think about our society, we think about how difficult it is and how we might be persecuted as Christians, that it's becoming more and more difficult. But guess what? You and I have the ability to come together like this, still don't we? And even if we had to do it in secret, look at how many are here even this evening. On any given Lord's Day, we'll have in excess of 200 people that we can come together with, that we can draw strength from. You and I have to live a righteous life, even when everything around us seems difficult. Noah was able to do it when he, in essence, stood alone. That's the definition of righteousness. James says that's the kind of man. The right prayer, the right man. Self-evaluation. Another problem that might come up sometimes that we just need to stop and consider is we might be expecting too much. And that sounds a little bit strange at first, doesn't it? But I'm afraid that if we're not careful, that we've allowed prayer to become something like maybe a lucky rabbit's foot. That we keep in our pocket, and when we need something or something important is going on in our lives, we pull out that lucky rabbit's foot and we want to rub it, hoping that we'll get exactly what we need at that moment. Or maybe another way that we view prayers, we view God kind of like a butler. You know, He's over here on the side and He's sitting there waiting for us. And when we need Him or something happens in our life, we go to Him in prayer. We ring the bell, if you will, expecting God to come to us and that He'll take care of whatever it is that we need at that moment, and we're done. We just let God come back on over here. That's not what God is. That's not who He is. That's not how we're supposed to approach Him in prayer. And if that's how we view God in prayer, then we're expecting something that's unrealistic. But I think another aspect of this is sometimes we think just because the answer is not yes, that God's not listening to that prayer. We can expect too much from the standpoint that we want the answer to be yes continually. Or that every situation that we think should come out a certain way, that's how we expect God to answer. How do we handle those moments when we think like that? How can you and I, as we're having this self-examination where we might struggle with expecting too much, how can we deal with that? May I submit to you that maybe the best thing for us to do in moments like that is go back to the garden? Turn to Hebrews chapter 5 with me. Hebrews chapter 5. When you and I struggle with expecting God to provide an answer of yes and not getting what we want in terms of that answer, let's remember the garden. Let's begin in verse 5 of chapter 5 of Hebrews. So also Christ did not glorify Himself to become high priest, but it was He who said to Him, "You are my Son, today I have begotten you." And He also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Now listen to verse 7. "Who in the days of His flesh, when He had offered up prayers," that communication, that constant conversation with God, expressing His wants and supplications, that urgent request that's of an urgent nature, in essence, our helplessness. How did He offer those up? With vehement cries and with tears. Luke would use the term agony in his gospel, the only gospel writer to include that term. And in fact, it's the only time in the New Testament that that word is even used, and it's in reference to Jesus when He was in the Garden of Gethsemane going before the Father in prayer. Cries, vehement cries, tears. Who are these prayers going to? To Him, to God, who is able to save him from death, and He was heard. God heard his prayers, but was the answer yes to Jesus' specific request? Of course, we know it wasn't. It was no. But what's interesting is God did answer his prayer. God answered it by sending an angel to strengthen him and encourage him, according to Luke. So here's Jesus coming before the Father in prayer and supplication, vehement cries and in tears and agony. When you and I struggle with not getting the answer that we want, maybe expecting too much, maybe we need to go back to the garden. Just remember the situation of Jesus. And the fact that God is meant to provide for you and me what's best, according to His view, according to what He sees. I use this analogy sometimes with our girls. We have with our girls. I've used it with young people too. It's difficult for us sometimes, isn't it, as humans? When you and I, if we were to look at that wall, all we see is up to that wall. Anything that's before that wall, we see it. We understand it. We can make judgments about everything we see between here and that wall, anything that's going on. But anything beyond that wall, we have no ability to see. So we have no idea if something on the other side of that wall is good, is it bad, is it helpful, is it harmful? But you see, God sees what's beyond that wall. He sees beyond our limitations. I've heard Dan Winkler use this particular illustration before, and I think it's pretty effective. Suppose you have two faithful Christians that live right across the street from each other. One of them's a farmer and the other one's a carpenter. And the farmer every day is praying for rain because, see, he needs that rain in order that his crops might grow. But every day that carpenter is praying for it not to rain because he's got a deadline to meet on his construction job. And see, rain would slow him down. You've got two faithful Christians, both praying for something entirely at odds with each other. One of them, their prayer is going to seem answered, the other one's going to seem like it's not. You and I have to remember that God is going to do what's best for mankind. He's going to do what's in accordance with His will. He's going to do what's best for all those involved, even if it may not seem like what's best at the very moment for you and for me. Why? Because God sees the bigger picture. He sees things that you and I can't see. We need to remember that. We need to keep it in mind when we think about those times where we might be expecting too much. On the opposite end of the spectrum, those we might be expecting too little. You know, there's two extremes here as we think about this. There's expecting too much and there's expecting too little. Turn with me to James chapter 1. If you remember, it's probably been several weeks ago now, maybe 2-3 months ago, we actually studied this particular section of verses, James chapter 1, verses 2 through 8. And if you do remember, James chapter 1, verse 2 talks about counting all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Now, how do we handle those trials that we come into contact with or that we find ourselves in? James would go on to address it in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, wisdom's needed when we come into those trials. How do you get it? Let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask how? In faith, without doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. See, you and I need to remember that there's two extremes. We can expect too much, but there's times maybe we expect too little. And when we approach God's throne, we need to fully expect that He is absolutely going to hear us, and He is absolutely going to answer us, and He is without a doubt going to give us what is in our best interest based upon what He knows and what He sees through His infinite wisdom and according to His will. Remember Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6? But without faith it is impossible to please Him. Remember that verse? For he who comes must what? Must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who do what? Diligently seek Him. You and I need to have full confidence that God is going to hear us. He is going to give us the things that are most beneficial. So we need to be careful of these two extremes. There's times we can expect too much, times we can expect too little. We need to understand that God will answer according to His will, according to what's in the best interest of His plan in mankind. There are times that we also just really need to examine our own lives. Turn with me to Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs, a key theme throughout Proverbs is the idea of wisdom. It's a key word found multiple times throughout the book. Chapter 1 sets the stage for that whole theme throughout the book. In fact, the book opens with this. To know wisdom and instruction, receive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, verses 2 and 3. Verse 8, Solomon would say, My son, hear the instruction of your father, do not forsake the law of your mother. And then verse 20, wisdom calls aloud outside, she raises her voice in the open squares. have that thought in your mind, that mental picture of wisdom as a voice talking. Now listen to what Solomon says, beginning in verse 24. Because I have called and you refused, wisdom calling out. What's wisdom? Beginning of instruction. It's understanding. It's fearing God. Because I've called and you have refused, I've stretched out my hand and no one regarded. Because you disdained all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm and your destruction comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. You know, God has provided instruction to you and to me. He's given us everything we need to know in order to have wisdom, in order to understand how we would have us to live. And if you and I blatantly choose to disregard that wisdom and that instruction, then we can rest assured that we're going to struggle in our prayer life. You see, sometimes we need to take a self-evaluation of just how we're living. 1 Peter chapter 3, a message specifically to husbands. Husbands, verse 7, husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. Why? That your prayers may not be hindered. Well, that's one of those verses for me as a husband that just steps all over my toes. Gets me right in the gut sometimes. You know how men, husbands, how we live with our wives, how we treat them, it impacts our prayer life. It can hinder our prayer life. It can stop it cold turkey. That's a sobering thought for us as husbands. You know, if we're struggling with our prayer life, especially if we're married, maybe there's times, husbands, where we just need to stop and think about how are we dealing with our wives. Are we treating them the way that God wants us to treat them? Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, Jesus would talk about forgiveness. Maybe we need to think about how we're forgiving others. That can affect our prayer life. You know, if we want forgiveness from God, that is contingent upon what? And we forgive others. You see, there are things in our lives that there are times we just need to have a self-evaluation. Just think about, how am I living? Am I living in a way that can somehow impact, hinder, stop, affect my prayer life? So as we think about times where we might struggle, we need to consider this. Is there a need for self-examination? But we also need to consider this, that our struggle might be self-inflicted. What do I mean by that? First thing is this. We might not be asking. Let's go to James chapter 4. James chapter 4. Sometimes we might be struggling because we are failing to ask for whatever it is that we might need. Let's begin in verse 1. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure, that war in your members? You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have. Why? Because you do not ask. What's James talking about here? At the heart of it is this. James's audience was struggling with pride. They were struggling with selfish ambition. Whatever it is that they desired, that they wanted, they were trying to get it through their own pride, through their own selfish ambition. What was that leading to? Wars and fights. Their own personal desire, lust, greed. As a result, they couldn't have what they wanted. They started to have hate. They started to covet. And James says, you know what? You want these things that's causing all these difficulty. And the reason you're having this difficulty is because you're trying to obtain it the wrong way, when the way that you should be trying to get it is by simply asking God for it. You want, but you don't have because you simply don't ask. Seems like the obvious, doesn't it? Sometimes the answer is right in front of our face. Sometimes when we struggle with our prayer life, it might be that we're trying to handle things ourselves. That we think we just know the right answer, that we've got everything under control, that God's too busy, whatever it is, that we might be deceiving ourselves, or that Satan might be putting in our minds to deceive us. We just fail to take it before God and talk to Him about it. Sometimes we've stopped asking, though. Let's continue on. James chapter 4. Actually, before we go, let's finish that. Think with me, go back to Genesis chapter 18. I want to at least acknowledge this point before we move on. We're not going to read all this, but I want you to think about this in terms of sometimes we just stopped asking. You probably remember this particular story here in Genesis chapter 18. Abraham is standing before God, and he's basically pleading for the lives of Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember what he did? He started out, Genesis chapter 18. Verse 22, then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. And he goes on and God says, yes, if there's 50 righteous, I'll spare the city. But you remember what does Abraham keep doing? He keeps pleading with God, doesn't he? He keeps on going and he gets to the point. Verse 32. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I'll speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And the Lord tells him, yes, even 10. I'll spare the city. I don't know about you, but this is one of my favorite Old Testament scenes to picture in my mind. Here's Abraham standing before God, and it's this, God, I hate to do this, but can I ask you just one more time? Will you know, God, just bear with me just once more? Sometimes we may think the answer is no, and we just need to keep on praying. Just keep on praying. Sometimes we just stop asking. Then the final one is this. Maybe we're asking for the wrong reason. Now let's go back to James chapter 4. So James has already told him, you do not have because you do not ask. Now look at verse 3. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. The reality is there are times that we are asking for things simply because it's what we want. Now it's interesting. I think about that word amiss. You ask amiss. You ask from the wrong motives. When I think about that word amiss, though, my mind goes to the idea of sin. Remember the Bible definition of sin is what? Missing the mark. Here's God's standard. Here's what God has described. Here's the mark that He has for us. The picture of a bullseye, if you will, and the archer draws back and misses completely. That's the idea of sin, missing the mark. Now this word's not connected to that. I'm just telling you where my mind goes. When you ask amiss, what was the amiss here for this particular audience? Because it's what they wanted, their own pleasures. Sin. You see, there are times we just have to be careful that the struggle with our prayer life might be self-inflicted because the motives behind what we're asking for are not really from a pure heart. They're not from a heart of wanting God's will to be done. You know, we pray that. We don't always understand what God's will is. And that's true. We can't always understand God's will. But it should still be a part of our prayer because God's will is what's best for you and for me. And that's a pure motive when we pray from that perspective. There are times that we all struggle with our prayer life. There might be times where we feel like maybe God's not there, that He doesn't care, or that He's not answering our specific situation. I hope that we'll consider maybe some of the practical suggestions that we've gone over tonight that might help us when we encounter those particular times in our lives. I think it's interesting, if you happen to notice, we've spent several moments tonight in the book of James as we thought about prayer. James has a lot to say about prayer. It's generally accepted that the author of James is the brother of Jesus. Tradition or history says that the knees of James, the brother of Jesus, were knees like camels. That doesn't exactly sound very flattering, does it? I've never seen the knees of camels up close, but here's what I know. Their knees are extremely callous from the way that they have to get down and push themselves back up, constantly rubbing on the ground for kneeling. History would say that the brother of Jesus, James, the author of the book, that his knees were like that from constantly being on them in prayer. Oh, that can be said of you and me, amen? That we spend that much time in prayer to the Lord. I hope this study has been beneficial to you over the last few weeks. I know for me personally it's been helpful for me. You and I need to be in constant communication with God, never taking for granted the wonderful blessing that you and I have to come before His throne in prayer. To know that when we approach His throne, wonderful things can happen, that you and I have access to blessings that are far greater than anything we could ever imagine. We need to remember the instruction that has been left for you and me. It teaches us how to pray. And then we need to remember that when we struggle, there are things that we can do, there are scriptures that we can go to that can provide us guidance to help us get out of those moments so that we can come back into the right relationship with God as we come before His throne. You might be here this evening and be in need of the gospel invitation tonight. It's always good that when we come together that we extend the Lord's invitation. Remember, it is His invitation. It really has nothing to do with us other than the fact that we help and facilitate each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. He's the one that provides rest. He's the one that provides comfort. He's the only one that can solve the problem of sin through His sacrifice on the cross. If you need to take advantage of His invitation tonight by being obedient to that gospel call, ultimately through baptism to have your sins washed away, or maybe you need to come back home because you wandered away, or maybe you're struggling in your life tonight, and you simply need the love and the care and the concern of your brothers and sisters to have us go before the throne of God on your behalf tonight. And won't you take advantage of the Lord's invitation this evening? Won't you do it even now as together we stand and sing?